Hey everyone, this is Somnath Gaudar from Future Coders. Today we are going to be building this form validator using JavaScript. Now let me just show you how it actually works. Now if I submit this form without filling any data, as you can see, here we get bunch of these errors. Now if I try to add the username here, let's only add two characters, and if I submit, as you can see, it says username must be at least 3 characters. Now if I enter 3 characters and hit submit, as you can see, it turns to green, meaning it is a valid input data. Now next one is email. It's gonna check for a valid email data. Now if I type here test and hit submit, as you can see, it says email is not valid. Now if I enter a valid email and hit submit, as you can see, it turns green and this is a valid email data. Again, inside of the password, it says password must be at least 6 characters. Now if I type the password as 1234 and hit submit, as you can see, password must be at least 6 characters. Now let's add 5 and 6 here and hit submit. As you can see, it turns to green, meaning that password is a valid. Now inside of the confirm password, if I type here 1 2 3 and 4 here and hit submit, as you can see, password do not match. Now if I type add 5 and 6 here, that is this password and this password are gonna be the same, so it turns to green, meaning all of this form data is valid. So let's get started. Before we start building this, please make sure you subscribe to our channel for more videos like this, and also don't forget to leave a like on this video. So let's get started. Now let's open up our Visual Studio Code. Here I am going to import the folder which I created for this project. So here, open folder, it's going to be the form validator. Now let me make this browser a little bit smaller so that you can see side by side. I'm just gonna cancel this final version which was for demonstration purpose, so I'm just gonna cancel that out. Here inside of the form validator, I'm gonna define some or create some 3 files. It's going to be, first one is going to be index.html, second is going to be style.css, third one is going to be script.js. Inside of the index.html, let me just add some boilerplate by pressing exclamatory and hitting enter. It's going to generate the boilerplate for the HTML. For the title, I'm going to name it as form validator and save. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and open with live server. If you don't know what live server is, you can actually go to the extensions marketplace and install that extension. All you have to do is search for live server and install this extension. Then you can right click here and open with live server, or here and open with live server. It's going to open our project inside of a server, which is going to automatically refresh whenever we make changes inside of our body. Now let's link the file, the style CSS file, by saying link. The source is going to be styles.css. Inside of the body, let's also link the script. It's going to say script.js, source is going to be script.js. Now inside of the body, let's start adding some HTML for our project. We are going to have a div with a class name container. Inside of this container, let's define the form, and that form is going to have an ID of form and a class name of form. We are not going to have any action, so I'm just gonna remove that. Okay, inside of the form, we are going to have a s2 tag saying register with us. Let's save and check. Okay, there we have our s2. Here I'm gonna define a form control so that we can add our input fields. Let's say form control. Inside of the form control, let's define a label. It's going to be for the username, and it's going to say username. Now below this, let's define the actual input. It is going to be of type text. By default, it's gonna give me the type text, and the placeholder. Let's add some ID to this. I'm gonna name the ID as username, and the placeholder is going to be enter username. Now let's save and check. As you can see, there we have our input, and also we are going to have a small tag saying, which is going to display the error message. As you seen in the beginning of this video, it was displaying an error message, right? So here we have the error message. Now actually I'm gonna copy this and paste it one more time. For now, for this it's going to be for the email, so I'm just gonna press Ctrl D and select wherever there is a username, and I'm gonna replace it with email. Obviously make this caps lock. Okay, now let's save. As you can see, there we have our another input field. Again, I'm just gonna copy this again. It's going to be for the password, right? So here where we have the email, let's replace. What are we doing here? Okay, let's select this and press Ctrl D. Wherever there is an email, I'm just gonna replace it with password. Let's make that be caps lock. Okay, now for the last one, we are going to have a confirm password, right? So here wherever there is a password, I'm just gonna say password 2. Here it should be enter password again. Here it should say confirm password. There we have our input fields. Now we are also going to have a button inside of the form. Let's define that button submit. Now this is our HTML. Now it's time to add some styles for this project. So let's do that. Now let's head over to our styles or CSS. Here I will be using a custom font from the Google, and I will be importing that. As you can see over here, you can import by going to fonts.google. You can import any of these fonts. So I will be just importing this Open Sans font. You can copy this, or you can just import this manually. So let's add some styles to our project. Here I'm going to target everything and say box sizing to border box. Now let's target the body. For the body, the background color is going to be a little bit grayish. For example, F9, FA, FB. Let's save and check. You might notice something, it's little bit gray. Okay, now for the font family, it's going to be Open Sans, which we imported from the Google Fonts, and a sans serif. Okay, now I'm gonna say display flex for the body. Align items to the center and justify content to the center. And I'm gonna specify a min height of 100 viewport heights. As you can see, it just centered our form, our body. Here I'm also going to take away the margin that's being applied by the browser, so let's set the margin to 0. Okay, Now let's target this container where we have this form. Okay, now let's target the container. For the container, I'm going to say background color of white, and the border radius is going to be 5 pixels. Now let's save and check. Okay, there we have our white container. And for the box shadow, it's going to be 0, 2 pixels, 10 pixels, and RGB value of 0, 0, 0, 0, and alpha value is going to be 0.3. There we have our box shadow. Now for the width, I'm going to set it as 400 pixels. Okay. Now let's target this S2. For the S2, I'm going to say text align center, and the margin is going to be 0, 0, and 20 pixels to the bottom. Okay. Now let's target the form, actually this form which is containing all of these form controls. Let's target that. For the form, I'm going to add some padding, 30 pixels to the top and bottom and 40 pixels to the left and right. Okay. Now let's target the form control, which are these individual form controls. So for the form control, let's set the margin bottom to 10 pixels, and let's add some padding bottom to 20 pixels. Let's also add the position of relative. Now if I save that, as you can see, there we have. Now let's target those labels which are inside of this form control. So let's do that. The form control, in that I'm going to target label, which is going to have a color of grayish, that is this one. Okay, now, and it's going to be display of block. Great. And margin bottom is going to be 5 pixels. Okay. Now let's target the input, that is this input which is inside of this form control. Let's target that. Form control input. For the input, the border is going to be 2 pixels. Solid F0, F0, F0. Okay. Now let's also set the border radius for the input, 4 pixels, and display of block. Let's also set the width to 100%. Let's save and check. Okay, there we have, as you can see. Now let's add some padding. Padding is going to be 10 pixels and the font size 14 pixels. Now let's save and check. Now let's target the focus field for the input. Form control, that is input focus. Outline is going to be 0, so we don't get that outline which we were getting previously. And we are going to add a border color of this grayish color, 777. Okay, there we have this grayish color border, right? Previously it was little black. So now it's time to target this form control. When we assign this form control a success class name. In the beginning we saw that whenever this input was correct, it was showing a green outline, right? So we are going to add that when the form control is having a class name of success, I want the input to turn border color to this green color. I'm just gonna declare some variables so that we can use them repeatedly. So at the top here I'm gonna say root. I'm gonna declare some variables by saying dash dash. It's the variable name is going to be success color. Whenever there is a success, meaning a valid input data, I want the outline color should be green, right? That is this color. And whenever there is an error, I want the error color to be E74C3C. Okay. Now here I'm just gonna assign those variables which we defined at the top. That's going to be var success color. Now if I add the form control here, a success class here, as you can see it turned green. So whenever there is a success class added to this form control, it's gonna turn the border color of the input to green. So let's remove that. We are going to add the success class using JavaScript. So, and also similarly we are going to say for the error I want the input border color to change to error color. Now if I add error to this email here, as you can see it turns red, right? So let's remove that. We are also going to add this by using JavaScript. Now let's target these small tags which we have here by saying form control. Instead of that, the small tags which are going to have a color of, it should be a variable error color. Now if I save that, as you can see, there we have our error messages in the red. Now I want position to absolute, and that should stick to bottom 0 and left 0. Okay, now I'm also going to set the visibility to hidden. We are gonna make them appear using JavaScript. For now they shouldn't display, right? So I'm just gonna visibility hidden. Now if I save that, as you can see, there we have them gone. Now whenever the form control is having a class name of error and I want the small to appear again, right? Visibility to visible. As you can see, now if I add this error class for the username here, it's gonna make it red and it's gonna make the error message appear. So if I save that, as you can see, it turns to the border color turned red and this error message just appeared. Let's remove this for now. Now let's also make this button a little bit nice, right? As you can see, it's looking very ugly right now. So let's target the form button, which is inside of the form and having this button. For the button, I want the cursor to turn to pointer. Let's set the background color to, I think it should be a little bit bluish color. So I guess, yeah, Let me just think what color we are gonna make it appear. So yes, I'm gonna make this a little bit bluish background color, and also let's add some border here. Border is going to be 2 pixels solid, and it's going to have the same color. Border is going to be the same color. Let's also add some border radius to 4 pixels. Okay, let's set the color to white so that the text color is white, and it's going to have a display of block. Font size is going to be, I think, 16 pixels. Yes, and padding is 20, let's say 10 pixels. That's great. Let's also add some margin to the top for 20 pixels. Okay, now let's also set the finally width to 100%. There we have our form. Now it's time to add some JavaScript. So let's add some JavaScript now. First step inside of the JavaScript is to grab all the elements that we need, right? So let's grab those the elements. First one is form. We need the form element. We can grab it by saying document.getElementById, and the ID is, and the ID is form. Now let's paste this, let's copy this and paste it 4 more times. Okay, here it should be for the username, and we can grab it by using the ID that we specified. We specified username. That should be username. Here it should be for the email. Let's grab the email using the ID that we can see here. That email is having the ID of email. You can grab it by using that ID. Here it's for the password, and it is also having the ID of password. Similarly for the password too, it is having an ID of password too. Now we have all the elements that we need. Now it's time to add an event listener to listen to this form when we click on submit. So let's add that. We are going to say form.addEventListener. We are going to listen for the the submit event, and we are going to call a function. It's going to take an event, and it's going to run this function. Let's just console log what we are going to get once we click on the submit. I'm going to console log submit, clicked. So let's open up our console real quick. Okay, when I click on the submit, as you can see, the clicked actually appears and goes away. As you can see, that's because by default this form is going to refresh and submit it to the server. But in case of this project, we are not using any server, right? We are doing actually checking for the data in the client. So we need to actually add e.preventDefault to prevent it from refreshing. Now if I save that and click on submit, as you can see, the form doesn't refresh and we get clicked. So firstly, I'm going to demonstrate how we can add a simple validation. Then we are going to refactor the code to make it more scalable. So we are going to use some if statements. For example, I'm going to check if username dot value. Remember, this username is going to contain all of the actual element, right? The value is going to contain whatever we type here. So we are going to check for username dot value. If it is equals to null, I'm going to call a function which we are going to define show error, and for that function I'm going to pass the username element and a message. It's going to say username is required. Okay, now let's define that function. over here, let's add some comments. These are event listeners. Now let's define the function that is show error. Okay, now for the function show error, it's gonna take in, as you already see, that actual input, that is username input field, that is this whole element. It's going to take in the whole element and a message which we are already passing. Here I need to grab, as you already seen when we were designing the styles, when there is an error we need to actually add the error class to this form control, right? How are we gonna access this form control? Here I will say const form control. I can access it using the input this element, that is this username input element, by saying parent element. That's because this input and the parent of this element is actually this form control, right? Not the label. These are in same hierarchy. This input field is present inside this form control, so by default it's going to be the parent, right? So we can grab this form control using input.parent element. Now for that form control, remember I need to actually add the error class, right? So I'm going to say class name is equals to, I need to add form control. This is going to replace the class name, so I need to keep whatever the class is over here, I need to keep it exact the same, and I'm going to add a new class, that is error. Now also for the small, we need to display that, right? Small tag const, I'm going to say small is equals to form control dot, actually I will perform query selector on this form control, which is this whole division. So when I perform query selector, I will look for the small tag. Once I get the small tag, I'm gonna add small, sorry for that, I'm gonna say small dot inner text. That's going to be the message which we want to display, which we already specified that username is required. Now to test this, let's actually hit submit. As you can see, when this gets true, that is we are checking for the null value. If that is there is no value, it's going to call this function and pass in this username element and this message. Inside of this function we are grabbing the form control and adding this error class to that form control. Remember, error class is going to turn this border into red and it's going to make the small tag appear. So we are actually specifying to the small tag a message here which it is going to display, inner text, right? So now if I type something that is valid and hit on submit, as you can see it should turn green, right? So we need to actually check for an else. If we enter the valid data, I'm gonna call one more function that's going to be show success, and it's going to be, we are going to pass the username as a parameter. That's the username element, the whole username element, that is this one, username input. So we need to actually define the show success, right? So here I'll add one more comment, show success, and for the function show success, And here I will have access to form control again. Remember, we can access it using input dot parent element. We need to actually pass the accept the parameter here input, and here I'm going to say form control. I'm going to add the class name of success. Here I'm going to say form control, and we are going to add the success class. Now if I type something valid here, if I type something which is not empty value, so if I hit submit, as you can see, it turns to green. Now if I don't add anything here and hit submit, it turns red with the error message. So we can actually do the same for this email, password, and this confirm password. So let's do that. Here let's copy. Let's do that for the email. Now I'm just gonna press Ctrl D to select everything, and here I will say email. Let's make it E. So if I type submit, as you can see, its email is required. Now again I'm gonna copy this. Now it's going to be for the password. I need to actually give here the password, here also password. Let's also add this to the password too. Let's copy this and paste it one more last time. Password 2. That should be, let's just say password 2 is required. Now if I save that, hit on submit, as you can see, all the data, all the input fields showing error message. That is, these fields are required. Now if I, for example, if I type invalid email, as you can see, it is turning green, and that is not an email, right? So we need to fix that. We are gonna call one more function here. Let's add one more function to check if the email is valid or not. Here I'm going to say call one more function is valid email. It's going to take the email here and check for if the email is valid or not. How are we going to do it? We are going to do it by using a regular expression. For the regular expression, I'm going to actually refer a Stack Overflow question. I'm just going to search for email validation regular expression here. I'm just gonna go with the Stack Overflow. Let's search for regular expression which we can use. Let's search for I'll be using this question here, which is this one. That should be this first answer. Here I'm going to use this regular expression. I'm just going to copy this and paste it over here. As you can see, there is a regular expression and it's going to run test on this email using this regular expression. It's going to check for whether this email is valid or not. So now if I call that function inside of this email here, when we check for the email, I'm just going to add one more else if here. Else if, and check for the condition if is valid email, and I'm going to pass the email value email.value to that function to check whether the entered email is valid or not. Now if I make this a little bit smaller and it's going to check for, actually I'm going to check for if it is not, if it is false, if this is email is not valid, I'm going to actually call this show error function saying email is not valid. Now to test it, if I enter something here which is not an email and hit on submit, as you can see, email is not valid. Now if I type something like test@gmail.com and hit on submit, as you can see, it's a valid email, so it is turning to green saying that it's a valid email. This is how we can add simple validation, but this is not scalable way to implement it. So we are gonna do, or we will tweak around this code to make it more scalable. So let's do that. So instead of having these bunch of if statements, let's remove these and implement another way. I'm gonna define a single function to check whether these are required or not. So when I hit on submit, it should check whether these fields are required or not and display whether username is required, email is required, password is required, like that. So here I'm going to define a function inside of this event listener. When I click on submit, it should fire off. So I'm going to call the function as required. Here I'm calling, I will just define the function after we add here required, check required, and here I'm going to pass an array of elements we want to check. I'm going to check for username, whether it is required or not, email, password, and password too. So now let's actually define this function over here. Check required function. Now it's going to check each and every element whether it is required or not. So inside of the function, I'm going to say function check required. I'm going to have it's going to take in this input array. It's an array, right, that we are passing. It's going to take in the input array. For that input array, we need to grab each and every element, right? So I'm going to perform for each and a call of function on each and every inputs, that is username, password, email. For each of those elements, I need to, let's console log first to see what we are getting. I'm just gonna console log input. Now if I click on submit, as you can see, we are getting all of those input fields, right? Email, username, email, password, right? I can grab each of those IDs. Remember, we have already given an ID field. We can grab that input.id by saying input.id, and if I save that and hit on submit, as you can see, we are grabbing each of those IDs which are assigned to those elements. So for them, here let's just say call the show error function here, input. Before that, actually I just forgot to add the if statement over here. Let's remove this console log for now, and I need to check for an if that input dot value. Remember, we access the ID, we can access the value dot trim. I'm gonna remove any white spaces which we might have, and if the value is null or an empty string, here I'm gonna call the function show error. It's gonna take in an input. As you already know that show error function, it's gonna take in the input and a message, right? So I will pass the input and a message. For the message, I need to actually display it dynamically. For example, username is required, email is required, password is required, right? I cannot actually mention individually here username is required, password is required. So I'm going to define one more function over here, and it should get field name, that is field names. These are the username, email, that are the field names. So in that function, field name it's gonna take in input, the input element, sorry, that input in each individual element, and for them it should return, we need to grab the input.id, and I should grab the first element. You will know what we are doing here, and we are grabbing the first character. As you can see inside of the id, we are grabbing this id. The first character is a small letter, right? So we are converting it to uppercase letter, only the first string. So for that I am grabbing the input.id, which is this id, and accessing the caret, that is at the 0th index. We are accessing the element at the 0th index, and for that I'm gonna say to uppercase. So it just converted grabbed the first letter of the id and converted to uppercase. And here I need to actually concatenate that input.id except the first string, right? So if I save that and call the function, let's use backticks here so that we can call the function, and inside of this variable here I'm gonna call the function get field name. Sorry, this function should be named as get field name, so I'm gonna call get field name and pass in the input, and here I'm just gonna say is required. Now if I save that and click on submit, we are getting some error, get field name is not defined. What? Okay, here actually I need to give field name, and if I save that, hit on submit, what did we miss out here? Okay, here we are not checking here. Actually I made a big mistake here, sorry for that. Here we need to assign it over here inside when we call this show error function, right? And here we are actually checking for whether it's empty or not. In that if statement we need to actually close here and call this function. Let's see what all we messed. Here we need to call the backticks, and we need to remove this extra bracket. Sorry for that, it was a mistake by my side. Now here if I click on submit, as you can see the first letter was converted to uppercase, that is username is required, email is required, all through this single function which we replaced when we used bunch of those if statements. Now it's time to add some more functionality to this form. For example, we need to check length of this username, if it is below 3 characters or above characters, and we also need to check for the valid email, which we already have a function for that. We are going to tweak around the function a little bit, and we also need to check whether these passwords match or do not match. So let's get on work with it. Let's work on that. Here I'm going to define another function to check for the length, and this function is going to take the username input element, and a minimum value and a maximum value. Similarly, we are going to call this check length function on the password also. For the password, it's going to take the password element, and the minimum is going to be 6 and maximum is going to be 25. Now let's define that function over, let's say over here. I'm going to add the comments, check input length. So here inside of the function, let's define the function first. It's gonna check for length, and it's gonna take in the input element. It's gonna check for the minimum and maximum value. Here, inside of the first if statement, we are gonna check for if input dot value dot length. It's gonna calculate the length of the input. Is if it is minimum, is less than minimum, that is this value 3 here. If it is less than minimum value, here I'm gonna say a show error. It's gonna take in the input and a message, right? So I'm gonna use the backticks. Similarly, I'm gonna call the function get field name. I'm gonna pass in the input and say must be at least, here let's concatenate the minimum value which we are getting from the function when we are calling characters. Now similarly, let's add an else if to check whether this input dot value dot length is greater than max value. It should say show error. I'm just gonna pass in the input and a message. It's gonna take in similarly a get field name function. It's gonna take in the input so that it gets the field name, and it will say must be less than that maximum characters. And here let's define an else block. If none of them is executed, we need to show success to show that that data is valid. Now if I say here username, let's just define 2 characters here and hit on submit. As you can see, username must be at least 3 characters. Now if I say ABC, and as you can see it turns to green, that is valid input data. Similarly for the password also, if I say 1 2 3 4 only, as you can see password must be at least 6 characters, and if I say here 5 6, and it turns to this green value. We made some mistake over here. It should be this password input password field should be of type password. We forgot to add that in the beginning. Okay, so that it doesn't display the password. That's a security mechanism. Okay, let's head over to our JavaScript. Now let's also add a check email function which we already have. I'm just going to change the name and tweak around a little bit. Check email. It's going to take in the email. Okay, we just need to change some code for this check email. Let's just say check email, and here I'm just going to check if this re.test and that inside of the test it should test on input which we pass, that should be value which access the email, and we are going to remove any white spaces if we have, and if it is true I need to show success message. It's going to take in the input. If it is false, if the test returns a false value, if it is not a valid email after going through this regular expression, I just need to say here show error, and as you might remember, it's going to take in the input and the message. I can directly say your email is not valid. Now let's save that and check. If I enter something here which is not a valid email and hit on submit, as you can see input is not defined. what are we making mistake over here? Okay, this should be input. Okay, now if I add something here and hit on submit, as you can see, email is not valid. If I add an email that is valid, now hit on submit, as you can see, it turns to green, meaning that this is a valid email, which is invalid email, right? Now let's work on adding a function to check whether these passwords match or not. So here we need to call another function. It's going to say check passwords match. It's going to take in password, the first password and the second password, which we are going to enter. Now here I need to actually define the function check passwords match. Let's define the function check passwords match. It's gonna take in input 1 and an input 2. Inside of the function, I'm just gonna check if input 1 dot value does not equals to input 2 dot value. If they are not equal, I'm just gonna show an error, on the input 2, and the message is going to be passwords do not match. Now if I save that and let's check it, 1 2 3 4 5 6, I'm here gonna say 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 here. Now if I say, as you can see, passwords do not match, and if I type 1 2 3 4 5 6, it's still gonna say passwords do not match. We might have made some, okay, inside of the check required, we are not defining any else block. For inside of the else block, we need to actually call the show success here. Now if I say here 1 2 3 4 5 6, 1 2 3 4 5 6 and hit on submit, as you can see, passwords match. If I write 7 here, this is 1 2 3 4 5 6 and this is 1 2 3 4 5 6 up to 7, and hit on submit, as you can see, passwords do not match. Similarly, let's test it one more time here from the username. Let's say AB, it's still gonna say at least 3 characters, ABC, it turns to green, that's the valid data. And for the email, let's define something like this, not a valid email, let's say gmail.com and submit. As you can see, it turns to green, and here I need to say 1 2 3 4 5 6 and it all turns to green, meaning these values we entered inside of this form are all valid. So that's it for this video. We actually built this form validator from scratch using just JavaScript. So that's it for this video. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and also don't forget to leave a like on this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and hope you guys learned something from this video. So I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.